nonprofits. Is it everyone green? Okay. So I just kind of want to go through 10 steps to an impactful volunteer program. Notice I didn't say 10 quick steps because they're not very quick. When you are used to working with volunteer programs, you know that they take time. Volunteer programs, it's kind of like planting a seed. My husband and I, we just planted seeds for our spring garden, and this is the first time we planted seeds in an in-house greenhouse from the very beginning. And so we have to be a little patient, right? Because we planted the seed and put the dirt all around it, watered it, and nothing has sprouted just yet. It takes time, and that's kind of what volunteer programs, they take time to grow. From a seed, they can grow to a sprout, to a plant. Eventually, volunteer programs can grow into a place where they actually are producing themselves, where volunteers are actually becoming your advocates and recruiting new volunteers. And that's the place you want to get to be. But step one, I just want to go ahead, is the vision. And sometimes this is the one step that's kind of forgotten because we just want to get to work. We want to get to our volunteers to where they need to be and get them plugged in and going. But if we don't start with a vision, we can't see the big picture of where we need to go and how we're going to place these volunteers. And I know some of you are probably already actively running healthy volunteer programs, but there might be some of you who are new to the volunteer leadership part of it. And I want to go through kind of the very beginning to the very end of how you can be successful in running a full impactful program. So step one is the vision. I start off with saying realistic expectations, because sometimes our maybe executive director or even the board of directors has this concept that we can have our whole nonprofit run by volunteers, but they don't take the time to have a plan in how you're going to achieve that, or understand that it takes time and give you that grace to the time that you need to get to the point where you can have a volunteer program. So the full focus is how you're going to realistic expectations. The second one is why people volunteer. People volunteer for a lot of different reasons, and helping to understand, understanding why volunteers come to your organization to give their gift of time kind of helps you set up your whole foundation. People volunteer for a variety of reasons. One, because they're passionate about your mission. And those are the kind of people that are really easy to place and easy to work with because they're sold out already on your mission, and they don't require a lot of work or gratitude. They just want to be there to make a difference. But some people come to volunteer because they have extra time on their hands. Maybe they've retired and sitting at home 24/7 has really not what they anticipated, and they have time that they want to spend doing something impactful. And so they might be excited about your mission, but even more so just excited to get out and be doing something. I've also seen that people come to volunteer for healing. We've seen people who've maybe lost a loved one, a spouse or something, and they're not ready to be in the world of activity and social engagement, yet they don't want to be alone. So they start to volunteer in areas that don't require them to have a lot of engagement with people, but it's still getting them out of the house. And that's a wonderful thing to see when people come and they start to heal through their hurt by volunteering and helping others. I think that's one of the quickest ways to get out of depression, is to be able to help someone else in need. Quick story about that. We had one of our seniors who her husband passed away, and she came to us at the senior center and was not ready to come to the social engagements and the classes and some of the field trips that we were having. And so we said, why don't you volunteer? And we put her at our front desk volunteer position. And in doing so, she was able to greet people and engage with people. And before long, you could see the healing start to take place in her heart and in her life. And then she became one of our main volunteers that runs one of our main fundraisers every year. And she's a social butterfly now. And so lots of different reasons that people volunteer. And I think that's important to understand when you're setting up the vision of how you're going to engage with these people, is knowing that they're all coming to you for different reasons. The next one is rules of engagement. Rules of engagement, I just put not the crummy work, but the impactful jobs. I'll give you kind of an idea of two stories. I worked with several nonprofits. Some of them I've helped them create volunteer programs from the very beginning. Some of them I've come in and kind of reevaluated because they weren't growing. They were stuck. And so we kind of assessed them and helped them get going again. And I had two different examples of not the crummy work. It's not that volunteers shouldn't and don't want to do some of the, as we say, the dirty work. And I'll give you an example. We worked at this animal shelter, and some of those jobs positions were cleaning the kennels and washing the soiled linens because each animal would get a fresh blanket every day. Now, some of you might think that's a crummy position, but that was a position that was meaningful. It was impactful. Those kennels had to be cleaned for the safety and well-being and the health of our animals. It was an important position. It wasn't a leftover position. It wasn't something that somebody just didn't want to do. That's not what I'm talking about. Those absolutely volunteers want to be part of, and that's an appropriate position. But on the other hand, we had another nonprofit we were working with, and the staff member was in administration, and the office volunteer there, she was working, and I could tell she wasn't happy, and she came and told me that, she says, I'm just getting the leftover work that this one staff member doesn't want to do. And I said, well, how do you know that? She says, because she told me. She's giving me the work she doesn't want to do, she says, and I just don't feel that I'm really, truly needed. And so that's when it becomes inappropriate. You don't want to create positions for your volunteers that are the leftovers or the crummy work, so to speak. You always want to make sure that when you're thinking about volunteer positions, that they're the impactful jobs. They're the ones that truly mean something. And so then you're going to go on to your dream. When you kind of have realistic expectations with your leadership and with yourself, you have timelines. Maybe you guys want to do 100 volunteers in 18 months, and how are you going to get to that? That's our dream. So then you have a plan on how you're going to build that vision and that dream. And then when you have your plan, you plan your work and work your plan, and then you can start going. And that's kind of where we're going to head. Just step 2 is working on that plan. So the step 2 is build a foundation. This is probably the most important step. And again, sometimes we just kind of get thrown into the volunteer position and we have to just run with it, and we don't have time to build that foundation. I say pause, go back, and make sure your foundation is strong. I don't know how many of you are full focused volunteer coordinators, and what I mean by that is, does your organization have you as only doing volunteer coordinating, or is it a line item? Some organizations will have the volunteer program run by someone who has a list of other duties. Their job description is full of all kinds of things, and then volunteer coordination is just a line item for one more thing that they have to do. I always want to encourage nonprofits to consider the value of your volunteer program, which when I ask, how important are volunteers to your organization, they always respond with, oh, they're immeasurable. We have to have our volunteers. They're the reason why our doors are open, but yet they don't fund someone to have a full focus. It doesn't have to be full time, but I have found that when organizations allow somebody to be fully focused just on the volunteer program, that program seems to flourish a lot more than someone who's got it on a line item. Even if that person is fabulous, they have a whole bunch of other job duties that they're doing in addition to the volunteer program. And volunteer programs are fun, they're rewarding to be part of, but they are a lot of work. They are exhausting because you're dealing with people and relationship building, and then what you put in is what you're going to get out. So in building the foundation, the very first thing I say is, do you have the right person leading the volunteers? And it can be someone, if I were to hire someone, I would say that they would need to be someone that is friendly, organized, committed, self-motivated. You guys can probably add some more adjectives to that kind of a person, but really someone who wants to do it. I've been in organizations where, again, it's not their full focus. They were hired to do programming, and they're doing a whole bunch of things, and then oversight of volunteers is also on their list. And it's not that they don't care, it's just they don't have time to do it. And so they never feel like they're meeting the standards or the goal of the volunteer program, and they're frustrated, and the volunteers can feel that. And we recently, I'm working with a nonprofit. That's exactly what they've done. I'm encouraging them, why don't you hire someone to be part-time but can fully focus just on volunteers? Instead, they moved it from the person that was kind of stressed out and moved it to another person who has other job duties. So we'll see how that goes, but I'm still kind of counseling them to make that commitment. If you calculate the number of hours, even by minimum wage, the number of hours that volunteers spend and save your organization, you can see that it's well worth having someone in that position to really promote the volunteer program and support it in the way it needs to be supported. But that does take time and focus. Step 2 in building a foundation is through support. You need support from your leadership, from your staff. You need support from your executive director to really be successful. So you want to make sure that you have the tools to be successful and that you're going to have support behind you. Another part in building a foundation is a budget. Are you budgeting an opportunity to spend and gratitude gifts for your volunteers, for marketing your program? That's really important, to set aside that fund so that you know it's available for the volunteer program. And then set the table. This is really important because it's almost like inviting someone over for dinner, but not having the table set, not having the menu ready. They come, they walk in, and you've invited them, you're as friendly as can be, but you don't even know what you're cooking for them. They can see that there's no place for them to sit, and it's going to feel awkward very quickly. Volunteers are the same way. You want to set the table before they come. So how do you set the table? You're going to set your priorities. I always say focus on 3 to 4 positions that you want to fill at a time. It can be overwhelming to the coordinator and to your marketing when you have, say, 15 or 20 different positions you're trying to fill all at once with 50 or 60 volunteers to fit into them. Set your priorities, pick 3 or 4 of the most important positions you're trying to fill, and focus on that. The next one I say is schedule, and I say don't bump into me. So many nonprofits I've talked to do one or the other. They either have a schedule, and I think that works so well, or they say, no, we're really flexible. We just let people come whenever they want to. And sometimes that works, but in my experience, a schedule is much more respectful to not only the volunteer, but to your staff too. I'll give you an example. We had 2 different thrift stores, nonprofit thrift stores that we worked with. The one thrift store, they took onto the schedule right away. So they had shifts, and we filled those shifts, and it went really well. Those volunteers knew that this was real positions because it was scheduled. And they were so committed that even if they had to go, if they were going to go on vacation or they were going to be gone for a while, they would work with each other and try to fill each other's schedule so that the staff member, there was only one staff member that ran it, he knew who he had every day, that he could count on them because there was a set schedule of volunteers. The other resale store said, no, we just like to let people kind of come in as they want. Well, unfortunately, it didn't take long before we had volunteers bumping into one another. We had this one volunteer who worked. She actually worked a full-time job, but she had a time slot where she could actually put into volunteering at the store. So she was really making an effort and a commitment to be there at this certain day at this certain time. But what would happen is the floater volunteers that were bored or whatever would come in on that day and kind of get ahead of her and do the work. Well, eventually she kind of said, I don't think you guys really need me, and therefore I'm not going to volunteer here anymore. And unfortunately, then what happened is she left, so then that afternoon shift wasn't getting filled at all because the ones that were floating, they decided to float on a different day, and then the staff was without help that day. So schedules, I really encourage you to consider keeping a schedule for your volunteers. It also helps your staff just be able to know who's coming and who's there. Another part of setting your table is job descriptions with requirements. You definitely want to have those set so your volunteers know what to expect up front. What is the job that I'm signing up for, and what are the requirements? Do they need a background check or fingerprint card, or a food handler's card if they're going to be in the kitchen, or a driver's record if they're going to be driving? Have those requirements up front so there's no surprises and that they can be ready to go as quickly as you're ready for them. The next one is guidelines. Guidelines as well, kind of like the job descriptions, you want to have it in advance. Guidelines are just telling your volunteers what to expect while they're there at your organization and what their position, if there's specific guidelines in the position that they're in. I'll give you an example. We did a nonprofit, it was an after-school kids program. And I met with the board member, and it was small staff. I think they had one full-time staff member and a part-time staff member. And the rest were all volunteers. And this was an after-school program for underprivileged children. And the board member told me one of her biggest frustrations with the volunteers is that they don't correct the children right. They don't discipline the kids. And she was really frustrated about it. So I asked her, well, can I look at your, I don't think we called it discipline. I think they called it redirecting. Can I see your redirecting guidelines? And she said, or what? I said, you know, what did you give the volunteers as a guideline to redirect students? I can, you know, read it over and see if it really is saying what you want it to say. Oh, we don't have one. She just assumed that everyone would have the same common sense that she thought she had when it comes to correcting kids. But, you know, everyone's different. We were all raised different. So you had different classrooms. One teacher would maybe raise her voice and yell at the kids to get their attention. Another one didn't do anything because she wanted the kids to be free to express themselves, even though one kid was pulling the hair of another. Another classroom was sticking kids in timeout chairs, and it was all chaotic. Those poor students didn't know what to expect from one room to another. So we quickly said, you've got to have guidelines. You can't be upset with your volunteers if you haven't given them the tools to be successful. So maybe you have some volunteers that you're going, man, they're not doing what I'd hope them to do. They're a little out of the boundaries. Reflect on yourself and say, did I set them up to be successful? Have I given them the guidelines that they can understand? And are they clearly written and posted so that they can know what we want them to be doing? So that's so important to have the guidelines. Communication, this one could be on every step really, because communication is really the key to so many issues. A lot of times people get their feelings hurt or they misunderstand something because there wasn't clear communication. So I always say, make sure from the very beginning that your volunteers have a way to communicate to you as the volunteer coordinator. They need to feel comfortable and confident, whether it be a communication form or just a way that they can reach out to you if they have questions and or concerns. Because a lot of times it's just because they didn't see the full picture. Volunteers are there for short amounts of time, and the big picture sometimes isn't always shown to them. And if you can sit down and explain to them why a new protocol was made or why this change has been made, then they understand. And you don't want them to communicate their feelings to one another if it's negative or out in the community. Negativity can spread, you know, like a cancer throughout an organization and really create some terrible waves if you don't nip it right away. So always have communication. The last one is train the staff. I hope that when staff is hired that they are told they'll be working with volunteers. This one organization, we had some staff that they got hired to do receiving with donations, and it was what they thought was going to be more of like an isolated position. They weren't told that they're going to be working with 5 to 10 volunteers every day, and that they would need to be friendly and be engaging and even oversee them. And so that's really important to make sure your staff knows what to expect from the beginning, and that they are trained. I can probably do a whole training on train the staff. Staff needs to be trained on how to communicate with volunteers, understanding them, supervising, and their input. Staff's input is very important when you're building a foundation for a volunteer program. I'll just share another little story. At the animal shelter, we were doing a wonderful thing with a new center, a new shelter, and a lot of people wanted to be part of this program. So volunteers were just coming in, 30 to 40 a month. We were just on fire. Well, the staff we didn't take time to really train the staff. We just started to implement the positions and let the volunteers come in, and things were going well until all of a sudden they weren't. And I was speaking to a couple of the volunteers that were leaving. I said, well, what's going on? Why are you leaving? And they said, we don't feel welcomed by the staff in this certain area. I said, you don't? And so I did a little research, talked to the staff, and the staff told me that they felt concerned that they were going to lose their jobs because volunteers were coming. And volunteers are going to do it for free, then they were at risk of losing a job. So I said, you guys are looking at this, all wrong. This is the perfect opportunity for you to shine in your position. And so we backed up and we said, what would it look like if you had volunteers that are now cleaning the kennels and doing the laundry? If that was 2 to 3 hours of your day, what then can you do to enhance the program with these animals? Oh, well, I could take the dogs for a walk. I could give them a bath. I could brush them, teach them how to sit so they're calm when they need a doctor. Yes, we just improved our mission and improved our program because you accepted the help from volunteers, and now we can do even greater things. So they caught on really quick, and before long, they were coming up with new positions for volunteers, and everybody wanted volunteers in their area. So I think training the staff ahead of time, letting the staff know it's important for their relationship with the volunteers, because volunteer coordinators can't be everywhere at one time. You're one person, and so you can't possibly be everywhere where every volunteer is, and that's where you rely on the staff becoming mini volunteer coordinators within their positions and helping volunteers feel connected and have that relationship with them is important. So now that we built our foundation, we're ready to recruit new volunteers. Some people say, I'm not good at asking. I don't like to ask people for things. And I see this too with my new position in the donor development. I don't want to ask for donations, or I don't want to ask people to give their time. But if you're so passionate about your mission, it really isn't as much as asking as it is inviting them to be part of it. And you're inspiring them through stories, through just your enthusiasm and excitement of your mission. So how do we get our new volunteers? Maybe an open house. I know with COVID, that caused kind of a hiccup in a lot of volunteer programs. With the nonprofit I'm at now, the Senior Center, a lot of our volunteers are seniors. And so we wanted to be respectful and protect them. And so we shut down a lot of our volunteer positions for a little while. And so now coming back, it's kind of like, do we need a kickoff event? Maybe whether it's a brand new volunteer program or you've been having a volunteer program for a while, but you need something fresh and exciting, consider maybe having a kickoff event. It doesn't have to be expensive. You can, get pizza or something and have an opportunity to refresh people on your mission, why they're there, what the need is, have your 3 to 4 different positions that you're pushing to fill, and just get people in the community excited about what your mission is and what you're doing, and hopefully recruit those new volunteers. Make a list of individuals that have touched your programs, have touched your organization, maybe through donation or support or called and just wanted to learn about your program. Companies and teams is another great opportunity. Lots of companies will come and maybe do a day special project or something. You can invite them to come to the open house. And sometimes there's this one nonprofit where they've actually asked a company to sponsor 1 day a month, and they send a volunteer from their company to fill in that need. And they kind of rotate, and the company pays for them, but they're able to come and support, and that's kind of a neat way to look at it. So I guess just thinking outside the box. Word of mouth, of course, that comes from your existing volunteers. If you have happy volunteers, they will speak for you, which is the best way to recruit volunteers, because having someone who's already there experiencing it and isn't getting paid to tell you how great you are, people tend to listen to them. So having another volunteer be able to advocate for you is a wonderful way to recruit new volunteers. And then just attending your local community meetings like the Chamber of Commerce. This morning I was at the Serostimus group at 7 o'clock this morning, quite early, but I had an opportunity to share our needs and our mission. And so just look for those ways that you can get out there and share and get people excited about coming and volunteering. And we're going to talk about marketing. Obviously, marketing is a big part of getting the word out there, but that's on another step. So we'll just keep going. Step 4 is retain. Now that you've recruited the volunteers, how do you keep them? It's more effort to recruit new volunteers than it is to retain. So you want to spend time on retaining. You want to make sure that your volunteers are happy. One of the things that I like to do is interviews versus orientation. I've done both. I mentioned at the animal shelter, there were so many people that wanted to be part of this new shelter that had just been built in this expansion program. We were getting 25 to 30 new people every month in the orientation. But what I was noticing is I wasn't getting them placed properly. They weren't staying how I wanted them to stay. It wasn't quality connection. So I went to interviews, and that sounds kind of, I don't know, serious, but it helps the person know that it is serious. We value the time of our volunteer. You know, I don't think there's any greater gift than someone can give than the gift of time, because resources that you give, a lot of times you can regain that back. You can, you know, save up the money to replace that fund, but your time once it's spent is gone. So that is something that you cherish when someone comes and says, I want to give you my greatest gift, the gift of time. And through the interview process, it starts to help you build that relationship with the volunteer. And that's really what it comes down to, is building a strong relationship with the people that are volunteering. And I love doing the interviews for a couple of reasons. One, because of that relationship building, but also it allows me to ask questions that help me understand who the individual is. We talked about different motives for people volunteering. So this is a great opportunity to find out what is motivating this person. Is it our mission? They might have a story where they had someone maybe touched by your program and it's motivated them to want to volunteer. To me, that says, ooh, I'm going to put that note on there. They're probably going to be a wonderful advocate for us. Someone might be coming because they're bored and they want something fun to do. So that tells me, okay, I need to make sure what I present to them and offer is fun and maybe have other volunteers that they can work with so they can build friendships and connection there. But I also like to ask questions like, do you consider yourself a rule maker or a rule follower? And this is one of these questions where it kind of helps me know if you've got a specific protocol. If you're working with maybe special needs children, or you're working with, like with the animal shelter, we had an area that was with sick animals, and protocols had to be followed a very specific way. So someone that says, no, I'm a rule follower, I just like to follow rules, I like to know what they are and I follow, I know they're going to be sensitive to following our protocols. Someone who says, I'm a rule maker, I like to make rules, I like to lead, is going to tell me that, wow, eventually maybe this is a volunteer who could become what I call a volunteer lead, who eventually learns and is experienced enough to now train new volunteers, which saves the staff time. So now you have volunteers training volunteers. And so you can ask these kind of questions that help you kind of learn a little bit about the person and where their future could be with your programs and your organization. The next one is proper placement. This is so important. You got to place volunteers where they want to be and where they can possibly use their experience. And I know this, and I practice this, but I'll tell you, this one nonprofit, I had asked, what is your 3 to 4 main positions that you're trying to fill? And they told me, we've got to register at our resale store. We don't have hardly anyone. We're really hurting terribly. We desperately need people to do the register. So I was training the new volunteer coordinator, and we did this interview together, and this wonderful lady, she sat down, and as we're interviewing her, we found out that she and her husband owned a grocery store, and that she ran customer service and the register for, 40 years. We both looked at each other, smiled, and did like a secret high five under the table because we're like, this is perfect. She's exactly what we're looking for. And I was kind of like proud. How easy is this when you follow the steps? So we put her over, we told her what the need was. She said, okay, put her over there at the resale store. A couple weeks go by after her volunteering, and I go to check up on her because that's really important. You always want to follow up with your volunteers, see how they're doing. I said, how's it going? She said, oh, okay. I said, just okay? She said, yeah. And I said, we got to be better than okay. What's going on? She goes, I got to be honest with you. She says, I have been behind a register for 40 years. To be honest, it's the last place I wanted to be. I didn't do a good enough job listening. If I would have slowed down and listened to her in the interview, I probably would have found that out. I said, no problem, we're going to move you. We've got other places that you'll shine in. And thankfully, we did move her, and she's still with the organization several years later. But it's so important to put proper placement. And in those interviews, one-on-one, you could really listen and help them be where they need to be. Training, that's kind of a no-brainer. If you're going to have a happy volunteer, you've got to train them. You've got to help them understand what they're supposed to do and have those guidelines ready to go in the training. Communication, again, so important. You want to make sure that your volunteers have a way that they can communicate to you and share new ideas that they have, but also concerns. And then connection. Connection is really important. You want to help them grow their connection with your mission. You want to help them grow connection with the staff members that they're working with, and also with other volunteers. Step 5 is recognition. So now we've recruited, we're retaining, and now we want to recognize these awesome volunteers. I like to say do at least a monthly touch, and this needs to be a variety of touches. Sometimes it's a verbal touch as they're, maybe leaving for the day. You can just shout out a thank you. You blessed us today. We're so glad that you were here. An email, a text, a handwritten card. That's unusual nowadays. So that's something that's actually special. It's a surprise when someone can go home, go to the mailbox, and it's not just junk mail. They actually have a handwritten note from the organization that they have been donating their time with. But just make it a variety of touches, and also personalize it as much as possible. You don't want to just send a generic card from your organization with your logo on it. You want to be able to say, hey, Janice, thank you specifically for what she's been doing. And then an annual event. Again, I know COVID kind of probably put a damper on some of this. It sounded like Alex was saying that you guys are having an annual event this year, which is wonderful to get back to those. But I think those are a lot of fun. Volunteers I know look forward to it. And it doesn't have to be expensive. It just has to be meaningful. And then I put from the staff. Again, our goal is to build relationships with the staff members that are working with volunteers, because, again, you're one person. And so what I do is I make these baskets for the staff. It's called a volunteer basket. And I put items in there such as a tape measure with a little note that says, no one can measure the impact that you've had in our organization. Thank you for volunteering. Or a candle that says, you light up our world. Thank you for choosing us to spend your time with. And all these little fun things you can get at the Dollar Tree. You can find ideas on Pinterest or Google them, but they're just ideas and fun little gifts that don't cost a lot, but I prep them in advance for the staff. I even put blank thank you cards. So the staff member that's working with that volunteer can go to the basket, and maybe Bob stayed an extra hour one day when we were really overloaded with amount of work or something, or he went out and above the call of duty. And so you want to just thank them. It gives that staff member an easy way to grab a gift and say, hey, I wanted to thank you today. It's a nice little surprise, but it's a great opportunity for staff to connect with the volunteers. Of course, you want to track it because you don't want Bob getting a tape measure every month from a whole bunch of different people. So you want to have a way to track how those gifts are being given to the different volunteers, but encourage your staff members and give them the tools to be successful in building that quality relationship with their volunteers. And then from the board, I think it's really great to have the board somehow involved. It doesn't have to be frequent, but letting the board know that there's people that are spending, maybe it's a celebration of someone who's been with volunteering for 5 years, and maybe the board would like to sign a special certificate for that individual. I think a volunteer getting something from the board president is a big deal. It can make them really feel motivated to continue, and it helps the board be aware of your hard work and connect them to the volunteer vision and mission that they set at the very beginning with you. Okay, so these are all kind of fun and wonderful to do, but step 6 is a little bit challenging, and I call it troubleshooting. What to do when a volunteer is not a good fit. Sometimes this happens. It hasn't happened very often. In fact, out of the several nonprofits that I've helped and the hundreds of volunteers I've worked with, I can only think of one time where I actually had to ask a volunteer to leave an organization. But having a protocol in advance will give you the confidence to know you've got something if you ever need it. Hopefully you never have to do this, because if you do a lot of those previous steps, it kind of helps set the stage for what your expectations are with the volunteer. It helps them with the guidelines that they know up front. But having a protocol to know how you're going to handle this, and then being positive and polite. I'll just share the incident. It was again at the animal shelter. We had someone who told us that she was retired. She didn't want a boss. She wasn't working anymore. So anytime a staff member would tell her what needed to be done, she would kind of rebel against it. She wanted to hang out with the cats. We had this wonderful position where it was just interacting with cats. She'd sit in the cat house and pet them and just help them become socialized for adoption. And that was pretty much the whole job. It wasn't a lot of guidelines or protocols. However, some of the cats were ill. I don't remember what they had, if it was like a ringworm or something that was going around that was contagious. And so protocols were set up to be, you needed to take gloves, wash your hands, and wear gloves and wear a protective garment for each cat house you went into. But she didn't want to do that. She didn't think it was necessary. And so staff members had complained. I witnessed it myself. Finally, after the third attempt of trying to help her see the reasoning behind this protocol, I had to ask her to leave. But I was very positive and polite, because you don't want someone to, even though I was very frustrated and even upset that she couldn't see the importance of protecting these animals, I knew that I needed to keep it as positive as possible, because she'd be one that would be out in the community again. And so I used her words. I said, you know, you mentioned that you're retired and how nice and rewarding that must feel, and that you the last thing you want is to have a boss and have rules, and I can respect that, understand that. But here at this animal shelter, our protocols are set for both the staff and the volunteers, and they're intended to be followed. And, you know, based on your desire to kind of be free of guidelines and protocols, I think it best that you no longer volunteer here. And if I remember correctly, she may have huffed and puffed a little bit, but she didn't cause any issues. She wasn't angry. I'm sure she knew in her heart that it was just a reality of what we were doing, whether she agreed completely on our protocols or not. But just having something ahead of time will really help you. You don't want to be taken off by surprise and then going, what do we do? Do I counsel this person on my own? Do I bring in my director? Do I need to have write-ups? You want to have all that kind of figured out. And then staff communication. This is important. You always want to give the staff an opportunity to share their concerns with you, just as much as you want the volunteers to. When you have happy staff that are excited about working with volunteers, your volunteers will pick up on that and they'll stay. And so you want to set up your staff to be able to communicate freely with you when they have concerns. Sometimes it's a personality conflict. Sometimes the staff are just, maybe they're just tired, or they didn't realize when they were hired that they would be overseeing volunteers as well. So it's just important to always communicate with your staff. Step 7, we're moving right along, we're almost there, is advanced. And this is the volunteer database and tracking system. If you guys, maybe some of you are already doing this. I work with a lot of smaller nonprofits, and this is what they would consider advanced because it's an expense into this program. But I love being able to track your volunteer hours, track your volunteer touches. We talked about how Bob maybe got a tape measure, and you can touch that and say, okay, he got a tape measure this month. I'm going to send him an email this month, and you're building those quality relationships. And we'll talk about why those relationships are important, not just for the volunteer program, but advance deeper into your organization. But that's something to consider. Get funded. There's a lot of volunteer program grants. If you just Google grants, or maybe, I don't know if you guys here have grants. I looked on the website, I didn't see any grant resources, but I may have missed it. But also like Alliance of Arizona, they have it if you pay a little bit more in your membership, that they'll send you grant opportunities. And there are grants that are specific for volunteer programs that can help pay for volunteer database or help pay for your organization to have a full focused volunteer coordinator. And then the corporate volunteer grant programs, these are really awesome. Like Intel, some of the bigger organizations, they'll have their employees volunteer and track their hours, and they'll match those hours with a donation, a monetary donation to your organization. So again, you can just kind of Google those out there and just see, call and ask what they have, but a lot of corporate volunteer grant programs are out there as well. That's something to consider. Step 8 is marketing, and it's not really step 8, it's just here because it took you through the process of setting up your vision and your foundation and everything, but marketing honestly will come up toward the beginning, right when you're ready to recruit your volunteers. But it's a little bit more intense, so I put it on a separate slide. But you want to focus again on your top 3 to 4 needs. Perfect your message to inspire. You're promoting these 3 to 4 needs. If you just say, we need kitchen help from 12 to 2, I don't know if that's going to inspire people. Okay, they need kitchen help. But if you inspire people, we are feeding underprivileged children from 12 to 2. These kids, you know, for some of them, it's the healthiest meal that they'll receive during the summer. And, you know, perfect your message to inspire people to want to donate their time. And then share impact. Look for ways that you can shout out in excitement of your volunteer impact. How did a volunteer improve your organization? How did that make a difference? How was their time changing the way that you're able to support your community with your programs? And appeal to all volunteer motives. We talked about it. Remember, some want to have fun, some are there for your mission, some are there for healing, whether they even realize it or not. So you want to include those kind of enticements when you're marketing. This is a fun place. This is an active place. You talk about your mission, of course. This is a place where when you give to our organization, you can't help but have your heart feel full and warm of the giving of your time. Promote in all available and affordable outlets. I know social media was talked about a little bit at the beginning. A lot of free outlets with your website, your Facebook, if you're on Instagram, Twitter, all those are wonderful to just continue to promote your needs, promote your organization, and just keep it going. You know, you get this momentum going, and marketing is time consuming as well. It's a lot to keep your happy volunteers retained, but then it's also a lot to market your new needs and just keep it going. And one thing I didn't put on here, but it's also great to market within your volunteer space. So if you have I don't know, like a sign-in where volunteers sign in, it's a great opportunity to say, you know, keep an eye out for new volunteers. These are the new positions that we need. Again, happy volunteers tend to be the best recruiters for you. Step 9, we're almost there, is growth assessment. This is an opportunity. Maybe you've been rolling for a while and you need to revisit the vision. Okay, our goal, our vision was 100 volunteers with 30 different positions. We have 45 volunteers that we've recruited so far in 15 positions. Let's revisit. Sometimes the organization changes the needs, right? I know with COVID, with the senior center, they became focused on certain programs. The need for those programs really shot up during COVID. And so it kind of pivoted and said, okay, we thought this was our needs, but now these are even more important to fulfill. And so just constantly revisiting that vision and those goals, set new goals so that you're constantly growing. You don't want to just meet one goal and be satisfied for too long. You want to go, okay, now what? Now we need new positions. Now we want to expand to this region, or we want to create these new programs with these new volunteers. You want to constantly be setting new goals, a new vision. Survey your volunteers, see how they're doing, what's working, what's not working, and do they have ideas? And then also survey your staff. Again, the staff is important to have their voice heard. What's working, what's not working, and do you see in your specific area something that you want to grow, something that you want to expand. And if you had volunteers, you could do something greater. And that gets the staff excited again about working with volunteers, and they'll become advocates as well, because if they had a say in expanding in their area, and now they're going to want to recruit some people that they know can fulfill that need, and they're growing and being part of that excitement. Step 10 is most excited, I think, because you have a quality volunteer that you've spent a lot of time with your relationship, you've cultivated them, your staff has a connection, they have a connection with your mission, and now they're becoming an advocate. And again, those volunteers that tend to volunteer specifically because they love your mission probably will advance to advocate a lot quicker than someone who said, oh, I'm just looking for something to do. But I think pretty much every volunteer can eventually get to the point where they become a strong advocate for you. They become maybe volunteer to donor. And this is something that, again, I think should be talked about in step 1 of the interview. When you're interviewing the volunteer, you want to educate them on your nonprofit, help them understand where the finances come, how are you supported, is it individual giving? Give them the facts and numbers, how many hours are volunteers providing, and show them the impact from the very beginning, and that gets them excited. It also gives them the knowledge to know that, hey, this is even bigger than my time. I could maybe even provide some resources as well. Testimonies, you want to grab those testimonies for especially your happy volunteers. You want to ask them to write down their volunteer experience. They tell a great story. It's their story to tell. And so if you can maybe even video them or have them write it down, put that on Facebook or put it in a newsletter or a spotlight featuring how their experience is, that's going to really promote your volunteer program, I think, even better than we could as coordinators, because it's coming from someone that's directly hands-on, that's not getting paid to do that. They're just that excited to be there that they're giving their gift of time. Volunteer recruiters. Yep, that's kind of what I've been saying all along, is that your volunteers will recruit new volunteers. They are having a great time and they get together with their friends, or maybe they're playing bridge somewhere, and they ask, what did you do today, Sally? Oh, I was working at the food bank, and we had so many wonderful people come through, and I had such a wonderful time. I love working with the staff there. And before you know it, their bridge table wants to be part of it. So since your volunteers are good recruiters, give them the tools to be successful. Give them brochures of your organization, or better yet, give them volunteer needs cards. So you have 3 to 4 positions that you're currently trying to fill. Put that on a card that we're looking for your kitchen help with their inspired tagline there to get people excited. Put down your contact information and hand out a few cards and say, hey, Sally, you're such a great blessing to us as a volunteer here, and would you mind taking a few of these cards, and when you feel it's appropriate to maybe hand them out to people or if you're attending any other meetings or something, help us spread the word. And you multiply that by however many volunteers you have. Before long, you have a great marketing tool out there of happy volunteers recruiting more happy volunteers. And then it just kind of keeps going, revolving around and around, and you have the support you need right there from your volunteers. I want to point out a couple of things. This was the end of step 10. A couple of things I didn't touch on, and that is when you're looking to tell your story. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of Ashley Bright. He talks about nonprofit storytelling. You can look him up. He's fantastic, really helps me. I'm a storyteller by nature. I love going out there and sharing and speaking in front of people. I'm so much better in person. Zoom kind of throws me. I apologize. The beginning was rough. I know I'm looking at this little round camera and I can't see anybody's faces. And so it kind of took me a little while to get going, and I apologize on that. But Ashley Bright is truly impactful in helping you write your story. He kind of just tweaked me just a little bit to get personal when I was sharing about my experiences and trying to motivate people to be part of a nonprofit. And that might be something to consider as a speaker here or even at your organization. But he'll help you tell your impactful story. Trying to think if there's other things that I wanted to talk about, but I think I probably covered most of that. I apologize if I went too fast. I kind of want to open it up to questions. Is there a way I can change the screen back to people so I can see people's faces? Alex, maybe you can do that, and then we can go through any questions that people might have.
I did stop sharing the screen, so it might be changing your view to gallery, perhaps.
Okay, well, unfortunately, I can't see anybody.
Oh, no.
I can only, I'm not sure what happened.
That's strange.
But if I can't see, if you want to just maybe read the questions, or if I can at least hear people, I'll do my best. But unfortunately, I just have a black screen staring at me.
Oh, that's so weird. I can read off questions that come through the chat.
Okay.
Or if people want to raise their hands or just shout out any questions they may have. One question that I had was, I wanted to hear your thoughts and opinions on kind of instilling not just mission, but like the broader cultural values of the nonprofit into the volunteer culture. So what I'm thinking, for example, is I think a lot of nonprofits are moving towards incorporating diversity, equity, and inclusion training with their staff. But how does that move from kind of the staff culture into the volunteer culture as well, if that makes any sense? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think I'm understanding your question, and I know I've been a lot of diversity trainings and seminars and webinars. It does seem to be like the hot topic. And, you know, we've just always treated anyone that walks through that door, whether they're there for the service, the program, they're a donor or a volunteer, they're treated the same. And so equality has always been something that we push. As far as recruiting diversity, that's interesting because I get a little, to be honest with you, I get a little stuck on this topic. Working with the nonprofits, and right now with the donor development and grant writing and fundraising, there are certain things that a nonprofit has to kind of, they have to qualify to be at a certain level nonprofit if they have this percentage of, you know, group of people, or this percentage of group of people. And they're asking these questions: how many of these people do you have on your board? And for the first time, I started looking at people in those people groups. And I'm like, wow, this is the whole purpose. We're not supposed to be trying to focus on people this way. And it's caused me to have to go, oh, are we going to reach this level of excellence, you know, label for our nonprofit? And I go, oh, good, so-and-so and so-and-so fit into that group. Oh, and that person is that lifestyle. And it's like, oh, that kind of just turned my whole way of thinking when we were happy when people came for our mission and wanted to serve. And so you have to be really careful that in effort to not do the very thing you're trying not to do, that you end up doing that, if that makes sense. So I'm not sure if I'm going to be the best one to answer that. It's probably
it's a complex question with a lot of meat to dig into. Yeah. Maybe that's something we could dig into in a.
You want to, and you have to understand too, pacing is limited in probably diversity. We have a lot of cowboys.
Yeah, fair.
And the seniors, obviously, I'm working for, so that qualifies because there's not an age discriminancy, you know. But we really treat everybody. If you're there and you want to be there for our mission and you want to learn more about us, we're all over you no matter what. But I understand in some places it's a sincere issue that has to be addressed, and I respect that. I just haven't personally experienced it, other than when I'm trying to write these grants or make sure that we're at that level that I'm like, oh, we actually do have diversity. And it didn't stand out to me until I had to write it down to
Mhm.
qualify for a certain grant or something.
Yeah, thank you. Mike writes, I get lots of one-day volunteers, young people for cleanups, gardens, etc. How can I rally some of them to serve more regularly or even do some basic support roles?
Great question. And I am assuming that you have a specific schedule and task. And that's why I always say go to the foundation and write your positions down with a set schedule. So if you need somebody to do garden work from 2 to 4 every day, but they're only coming 1 a day, when you meet with these people, let them know, can you at least do 2 hours a week? Can you take the Monday shift from 2 to 4, maybe once a month? But if you can get them to commit to a schedule, and that you have to determine what's appropriate for your organization. Some organizations are really large, and I know they can kind of afford to have people come and go. Smaller nonprofits, I think the schedule works perfectly. And if you have a real shift, that person knows it's not just busy time. You're not just finding me something fluffy to do. This is a real position that we would have to pay somebody, but instead we're so thankful to fill it with a volunteer. So I would go back to setting your schedule, work on 3 to 4 of your positions. And, I also always offer some flexibility positions. So if somebody comes to you and they're like, no, I really can't commit to a schedule. I love your mission. I want to be part of it. I have positions for them, like fundraising, because that's not a daily thing necessarily. That might be an event, or, helping me with mailers, or if you're having a special cleaning day, can I call you? Can you be on call to fill in when some other volunteers can't make their shift? And we can be flexible in that way so that you still keep them engaged and connected because they want to be. But for the majority of your positions, you want to have a schedule, and hopefully that will help when you talk to these people as they're coming in. Let them know that this is a real schedule, and boy, I'd love to be able to depend on you once a week. Try, if not once a month, and try filling it in that way. Hope that helps.
Mike is nodding his head. Since you can't see
Okay.
WL.
I can't see you. I'm sorry.
Um,
at least
another-
see Alex now, so that's
Yeah.
comforting to a person.
And I wonder if in the top right-hand corner of your Zoom, there's like a view with like a little dots next to it, or a grid. Do you happen to have that? Might just be some weird glitch on your end, but if not, switching it to gallery
It's
mode should
probably
open it.
a weird glitch. I got a little note that said your connection is unstable, and so it's probably on my end. I better not touch anything, or I might be gone altogether.
Fair. A question that came through was on modes of feedback for volunteers. What has, in your experience, been the like having direct interviews, or like an event where volunteers can give feedback, or sending out digital surveys? What has been most effective on your end, or what's your opinion on getting that feedback from volunteers?
Sure. I think having it have a survey form that can even handed out, and you ask them to fill it out while they're there at that shift. That way you're more likely to get it returned. If you send it out an email, sometimes that gets missed. If you could call. I don't know how many volunteers you have. You could even call and do a survey over the phone if it's not too of a huge task. Otherwise, I would just go ahead and have a little survey form, have a box where they can drop it in and just say, we're collecting these surveys, would you take 5 minutes to fill it out? And you don't want a lengthy survey. You don't want them to go, oh my goodness, I'm writing a book. You just want to have maybe 4 questions, 5 questions max, just to get their opinion. I mean, it might be very quick because how are things going? Great, it doesn't tell you. But it still is, it's an opportunity for them to communicate if ever they're feeling something on their heart that they haven't been able to share. And that could be even one of the questions, would you like to meet with me in person? So I think the best way is just to have it do it while they're there and turn it in right away.
Awesome. Yeah, that's helpful. That's always something that I struggle with, is the best way to get feedback from folks.
Stand there.
Yeah.
Stand there and smile. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
But really just trying to have them complete it in that moment is the best.
Yeah. Anybody else have any burning questions?
I hope there were some nuggets for some of you. You probably, or some of you are really experienced and maybe you're having a healthy, strong, growing volunteer program. I just encourage you to keep going. Don't let yourself get burned out. Reach out for support in the areas that you can. Delegate to your other volunteers that are key volunteers. Train the staff so that they're strong with you, and just keep going. You're doing a great work. I know it's not always easy. It can be very exhausting dealing with different personalities and different demands all the time. And truly, I have such a strong respect for volunteer coordinators. And I always let the boards know it's not about what the task is, it's about the number of people that they oversee. So you have an executive director that maybe oversees 30 or 40 staff. You have a volunteer coordinator that sometimes is overseeing 100 volunteers, 100 people you're asking them to oversee. So let them be successful by giving them the time to do that and the support that they need. So
yeah.
In other words, don't be shy. Ask for that raise. You deserve it.
Ask for more funding. Yeah. That's awesome. Great. Well, if nobody else has any other questions. Oh, we got Cassie says, thank you so much, Debbie and Alex. Re-energized and have lots of great takeaways. Yay. Glad, Cassie.
Good. Yay.
Sweet. Well, I think that we can conclude a little bit early. Thank you, Debbie, so much for that amazing presentation. I got a lot of nuggets from that 2 pages worth. So thank you very much. And sounds like other people had a good experience as well. Carrie says, thank you so much. Great info.
Well, thank you for the opportunity.
Oh yeah, thank you for taking your time
the
out of your day.
Blessings here. I wish I could have done it in person. Again, I apologize for the rough start. I was trying to get my computer and talk at the same time. And
no worries. Technology is, yep, technology is every time.
All right.
Great. Well,